The X-Zone radio and TV show is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone radio and TV show or in any manner endorsed by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, Talkstar Radio Network, its affiliated stations, or employees.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Exonation, welcome back. My name's Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My email address, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com, and our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour by no means is a stranger to anyone who has any interest whatsoever in ufology. Chris Rutkowski is my special guest. We're going to be talking to Chris this hour, not only about UFOs, but about his new book that has been published by Dundurn. The new book is entitled The Big Book of UFOs. As I said, Chris's name is synonymous with UFO research the world over, and the Big Book of UFOs captures his most compelling research. Along with exciting new accounts, readers from around the world will be asking, are we alone in the universe? Well, the Big Book of UFOs is a compendium of the best and most disturbing UFO stories from both, or for both, enthusiastic fans and ardent skeptics. Chris takes us on a tour of the unexplained in Canada and around the world, weaving his deep studies of UFOs, aliens, and abductions to create a one-stop resource. The massive guide to all things UFOs offers many reports, including, listen to this, Exonation, the ghost airplanes seen over Canada's Parliament in 1915, but also describes many stirring new cases, secret files, statistics, as well as lots of factoids and trivia to awaken the ufologist, I'll get it straight yet, and everyone. Chris is a science writer who has devoted much of his time to investigating and studying reports of UFOs, writing about case investigations, and offering his insights into the broad UFO phenomenon. Joining me now from Manitoba, Canada, is Chris Rutkowski. And Chris, first of all, congratulations on a great new book.
Well, thank you very much.
Chris, how did you get started into ufology? What was the catalyst that said, Chris, you're going to be part of this?
Well, it started back in the 70s. I have been around a little while, and I went right from high school and university, and one of the courses I took was astronomy, because at that time we were just finishing up the Apollo program, and everybody was talking about going to the moon, and what will we meet? Will we meet aliens out there? Is there life out there? It was space was the real big thing back then, and there's a lot of excitement. And at the same time, coincidentally, in the mid 1970s, there were a series of UFO sightings across Canada. 1975 and 76 was a bit of a wave. There were flaps in Manitoba, and I I thought, well, I'm interested in this sort of stuff, I suppose, peripherally, but, in astronomy, you're told that there's no such thing as UFOs. In fact, our professors were adamant that UFOs are complete nonsense. There's nothing to it whatsoever. And yet, what happened was, in the astronomy department, I happened to be standing around in my professor's office one day when a phone call came in from someone from the public wanting to report a UFO. And of course, since UFOs are nonsense and he couldn't be bothered with such things, he was a little bit annoyed. And I said, you know what, why don't I take these calls for you, trying to get in good with my professor.
Uh-huh.
And he said, yeah, that's a good idea. So I took the call and spoke to the person and took down some information. I was a little bit puzzled as to why they would report such a thing since no such things existed. And that was that, except the calls kept coming in day after day. And pretty soon I encountered cases I was really puzzling about as a scientist. These things shouldn't possibly exist. I'll go out and maybe talk to these people. So I went actually out into the field, ended up talking over the next number of weeks and months to hundreds of people who had seen UFOs, and using as much scientific knowledge as I could apply and the methodology, there were cases I simply could not explain.
All right,
here
Chris.
was the dilemma.
Chris, we've got to take our commercial break. Please stand by. Okay. Chris Rutkowski is our special guest. The Big Book of UFOs. I'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Exonation, Chris Rutkowski is our special guest. He's got a brand new book out, The Big Book of UFOs. Chris has also written Abductions and Aliens and, of course, the Canadian UFO Report. And for more information on Chris, visit his blog at uforum.blogspot.com. That's uforum.blogspot.com. Okay, Chris, before we went to the commercial break, you were telling us how you were trying to get in good with your professor and you started taking the UFO calls. Do you remember the first case you actually went out and investigated?
Yes, it was a case where some farmers had been driving home after working their fields, and they saw a bright light moving up over the trees, and they described it as a Ferris wheel in the sky, very, very large disc-shaped object on its side with colored lights all around its edge and spokes leading into its center. And this was moving very slowly and majestically overhead. And I tried my best as an astronomer to explain this away as Venus or a hot air balloon or something, and it just didn't cut it. So I ended up being asked to present what I heard and discovered to people in the astronomy department and throughout the university, and I just told it straight. And by golly, I found the interest was definitely there. People were fascinated by this. They wanted to know more and more, and before I knew it, I was being asked to give more talks and invited to write up what I've seen, and that spun out into writing some books and articles and a number of other appearances. So it sort of took off from there, pardon the pun, as far as UFOs are concerned.
Chris, what are the statistics on UFOs here in Canada?
Well, they're pretty significant, as a matter of fact. Since 1989, myself and Jeff Dittman have been, who's one of my colleagues here with ufology research in Winnipeg, have been compiling annual data on Canada. Back in the mid-1980s, I realized we really didn't have a good handle on how many cases there were throughout the entire country, where there are more sightings in Ontario versus Quebec and BC versus Saskatchewan and so forth, and what types of characteristics did these objects have. So I wanted to know and get good data. So I started corresponding with other researchers and then investigating much more actively myself, and soon began compiling this, what is called the annual UFO survey for Canada. And back then, I think we were getting something like 150, 175 to 200 cases per year throughout Canada. And then as we are collecting and gathering abilities and technologies got a little bit better with the advent of the Internet into the 90s, for example, we were able to learn more and more cases, and people were able to send their cases into other repositories. And we started getting 500 or 600 cases per year until they reached an all-time high in 2008 of more than 1,000 UFO reports in Canada in 1 year. 2009 was a little bit lower, somewhere in the 700s, but that means that the 1,000 was probably a glitch, because just so far in 2010, we obviously won't complete our study for at least another 6 months or so, but we're seeing numbers back from the 2008 level. So when you're looking at that amount, and we're probably close to 10,000 UFO reports in Canada on file that we have over the past 21, 22 years, that's a significant number. And there have been polls that suggested that 1 in 10 Canadians believe they've seen UFOs. We certainly don't see those numbers of reports, because another factor is that only 1 in 10, or perhaps lower than that, perhaps 1 in 25 people who have seen a UFO actually report it. So, but nevertheless, when you're thinking 1 in 10 people in Canada believing they're seeing a UFO, and that percentage is about the same throughout North America, you're talking about a very significant number of people throughout the country and in other countries who believe they've seen UFOs.
When did UFOs really start being seen in Canadian skies? When was the first recorded reporting of a UFO, Chris?
Well, the first one actually goes back into the 1600s.
Wow!
When some of the missionaries working in what is now Montreal had been spending some times with the indigenous people there, and they had said that they had seen flaming dragons and balls of fire moving throughout the sky. Now, of course, many of these certainly could have been fireballs, bolides, giant meteors, that type of thing. But they were puzzling, and they were recorded in some of the diaries and journals of the Jesuit missionaries of the time. And we have records of objects in the sky for which there's no explanation dating back to the 1600s. So we've got quite a long history here in Canada.
In your opinion, Chris, what is the most conclusive UFO sighting that has happened in Canada that, to you, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that UFOs are real?
Well, I mean, I have to couch my answer in the semantics that we know UFOs are real because unidentified flying objects are reported. I mean, people see them all the time, whether they are alien spacecraft or military vehicles or something else, a natural phenomenon. That remains to be seen, and I think every case has to be looked at individually. I don't think we can make blanket statements, but the case to me that really proves that there's something worth studying and that there's something very unusual going on is the one for which I had the most involvement, which was the Falcon Lake case in 1967 with Stefan Michalek. Now, actually, I wasn't investigating that long ago, but as it turns out, by complete happenstance, I actually was a friend of this witness's son at the time here in Winnipeg, and got to see the burns that were on his body and to talk with the family firsthand back in the 1960s. And for those who aren't aware, back in May of 1967, prospector Stefan Michalek was trying to stake a few more claims. He already had a number of claims for silver and whatnot in the area right along the Manitoba-Ontario border, inside Manitoba, in a place called Whiteshell. And on this particular day, he had stopped for lunch, and as he was sitting around lunchtime, two objects, which were, for lack of a better expression, looked like flying saucers just right out of Hollywood, flew overhead. One landed on a rock outcropping nearby. There was a door which had opened in the side. Lights were streaming out. And this witness, Mr. Mihalik, actually walked up because he thought perhaps this was some sort of American secret weapon or a landing vehicle of some sort. And he bravely walked right up to the side, put his hands on the side, and poked his head through the doorway to see an array of flashing lights. He felt an intense pain because the side of this thing was very hot. His gloves were actually burned. The door shut all of a sudden. The entire object, which was about 35 feet across, rotated. A big grill-like array was in front of him. When it rotated, a blast of hot gas hit him in the chest, knocked him to the ground, setting his clothes on fire, setting some vegetation on fire, and the thing took off. Mr. Mihalik was eventually treated in hospital for second and third degree burns. And he actually ended up at the Mayo Clinic, where doctors were puzzled over his condition, and he was given later a psychiatric assessment, which suggested he's not the type of person to make things up. Later investigations by organizations such as the Royal Canadian Air Force, the United States Air Force, provincial departments of mines and natural resources, as well as RCMP and a host of other agencies, investigated. They went out to the site. There had been some radiation found in some of the vegetation and on some of the clothes which were left behind. There were pieces of radioactive silver found in a crack in the rock over which this object hovered. This case is so full of physiological and physical evidence, plus an incredible story. To me, it's easily one of the most profound cases on record anywhere in the world.
There was also a case that I came across in your book about UFOs, or ghost airplanes, seen over Canada's Parliament in 1915. Mm-hmm. What was that case about, Chris?
Yeah. Well, there was some war jitters going on at the time, and during that time, there were some lights that were seen moving out around the Ottawa area. Mm-hmm. And because there was some concern that perhaps these were enemy aircraft flying overhead that were going to be doing some bombing or strafing runs, they decided to actually shut the lights off on Parliament Hill. Can you imagine? All of Ottawa blacked out because UFOs were seen coming towards Ottawa from the east, and many people had seen them, and yet there still wasn't any satisfactory explanation, although a number of people had suggested perhaps they were some fire balloons that individuals had put up for some festivities, and yet this caused such an uproar that the mayor of Ottawa had worked with defense individuals in the Ministry of Defense and said, let's black out Ottawa, including Parliament Hill, because this is a possible threat.
Chris, stand by. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Great having you with us here in the X-Zone. X-Zone Nation, our special guest this hour, Chris Rutkowski. He is a Canadian UFO researcher and science writer. He's well known by anyone who has anything to do with UFOs. You just mentioned Chris's name, and they say, oh, yeah, I've read his stuff. I've been to his website. I go to his blog, which is uforum.blogspot.com, uforum.blogspot.com. And Chris and I will be back on the other side of this commercial with the news. We're also talking about Chris's new book, The Big Book of UFOs. And if you'd like to find out more about the book, just go to www.dundurn.com. But once again, Chris's blogspot is uforum.blogspot.com. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. I'll be back on the other side of this news break as we continue from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
You're listening to the X-Zone Radio Show, live and around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network.
X-Zone Broadcast Network, UK High Definition Radio,
Euro High Definition Radio,
and Star Cable. Our toll-free telephone number worldwide is 1-800-610-7035.
Our email address, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com.
On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com.
And our website,
www.xzoneradiotv.com.
I believe it's meant to be, darling. I watch you.
We've gone too far this time, but I'm dancing on the Valentine. I tell you, somebody's fooling around with my chances on the danger line. I'll cross that bridge when I find it. Another day to make my stand. Oh, high time is no time for deciding if I should find a helping hand. Oh, why don't you use it? Try not to bruise.
Exonation Chris Rutkowski is our special guest of this hour. Chris has written a new book, The Big Book of UFOs. His website, uforum.blogspot.com. Chris, anyone who talks about UFOs in Canada always talks about Shag Harbor. For those listeners who may have joined us recently and have never heard about Shag Harbor, what can you tell them?
Well, oddly enough, in the same year that Stefan Mihalik had his encounter, something very unusual happened out in Shag Harbor, which is just off the coast of Nova Scotia. It's interesting that it did occur the same year, which suggested that there was something very strange going on in Canada. It's known as Canada's version of Roswell, where something was actually seen to fall from the sky, and there were a number of witnesses who had seen an object passing over the land and falling into the ocean. And people were on shore watching this thing slowly stay on top of the water for a while, and there was a bright light that slowly made itself under the water, and people had called for rescue because they thought it was, perhaps an aircraft, perhaps something else. So boats had been commissioned by the RCMP to head out into water trying for a rescue. When they arrived there, it was sometime after that the thing was seen to hit the water that they got there. Unfortunately, all that could be seen would be a bit of a glow and a greenish glowing ring of materials just hanging on the water, which eventually did dissipate. It was very strange. There were many witnesses to this. In fact, this is what distinguishes it from Roswell, is that we actually have witnesses to the object crashing exactly where it was crashing, and was investigated immediately by police and some of the additional fishermen. So in some ways, it's actually a better case than Roswell because we have the witnesses. And in addition, there's official documentation which was discovered by Chris Stiles and Don Ledger of government documents which show that there was interest. This object was reported. It was investigated at a number of high levels, and a number of people have come forward with some very interesting stories that although naval vessels did go to the area and that scuba gear was used to try and retrieve something, the official story was that nothing was ever found, and yet stories have been floating around, again, pardon the pun, that something was retrieved, something was taken out of the water and loaded onto a flatbed truck and taken away for parts unknown. In addition, there appears to have been a second incident or a similar incident whereby there had been some naval operations by the U.S. Navy in a different harbor, but that somehow divers and underwater vessels, perhaps even a submarine, had traveled into Shag Harbor to investigate above and beyond what had been previously reported. So we have official documentation. There are these documents have been located and to attest to the fact that there was some study and some attempt to retrieve what this was, plus the witnesses, plus police investigations. So it's a very, very fascinating case.
Chris, is it possible that whatever fell into Shag Harbor might have been a satellite that was making a reentry unscheduled or out of its normal trajectory, and that what people saw was actually the Canadian Armed Forces and other members of government trying to recover this space debris, which may have been Russian?
Absolutely. In fact, not only space debris, but we do know, I was able to locate the files for the Corona space program, and this was a photographic program where a satellite was launched, taking photographs of sensitive areas, and then dropping a film canister back down to Earth, which was then retrieved by aircraft. We know that this was performed many times over Canada, in fact, almost in this exact area by the United States. It was a very highly classified program. In fact, we only learned about it just over the past 10 years or so when certain documents were made available, and it has a fascinating depiction of how military operations were conducted over Canada without our knowledge, of course, and involved satellite reentry, things that may have gone astray. In addition, we do know that about this same time that sonar devices had been deployed, and there was some research being done by the United States Navy on the seafloor just off of Nova Scotia. So there's no question that there were some military operations underwater at the time as well. So we're not saying that the Shag Harbor incident was definitely alien in any form necessarily, but there certainly was something unusual going on. It may have had some more terrestrial origins, but was still very mysterious.
Chris, talking about extraterrestrials, UFOs, alien abductions usually come into the conversation sooner or later. To the best of your knowledge, Chris, has there ever been an alien abduction reported in Canada?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, many individuals have come even directly to my attention, have approached me with some very interesting stories. I actually had a military officer come to me, come into my office and say, I can't tell my commanding officer this, but I believe that I have been abducted by aliens. So the stories themselves are actually relatively common. What's really going on, it's difficult to say. Again, I think case-by-case studies have to be evaluated. In some cases, I think people are perhaps not necessarily hallucinating, but are having some dissociative events. In other cases, where it seems that there is no psychological pathology or psychopathology involved, there's no reason for people to make up the stories, nothing that would indicate stress or trauma, and yet they have fascinating and very bewildering stories of objects or creatures coming into their bedrooms, living rooms, whatnot, while they're driving, while they're in a variety of locations, and having very strange experiences involving encounters with creatures that appear to be from another planet. In some cases, the next step beyond abductions is, of course, contactees, where the aliens appear to impart knowledge or information to the individuals who then believe that they were chosen as emissaries or for information or to give information to the rest of humankind. So there are a number of categories, but these cases are relatively common. They were certainly more common back in the 80s and 90s, not as common anymore, although there are still some very prominent cases which are throughout the world. Stan Romanek, I'm sure you're familiar with down in Canada, but in the States. Mm-hmm. He's a classic case where something appears to be, if you can use the term, haunting him. There's a crossover from aliens into the ghost realm, perhaps, where the aliens appear to be in his windows, and he has a number of other bits of information and knowledge that have been imparted to him in one way or another. And the debate rages as to whether this is something real that's occurring or something that's in Stan's imagination. So it's absolutely fascinating as a phenomenon. Whether it's a real phenomenon in the sense that it represents something that aliens are really doing, that's another question entirely.
I remember a couple of years ago, Chris, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we were constantly getting reports about cattle mutilations. And then prior to that, there were the reports of the Men in Black. It seems that Men in Black reports are way down. And cattle mutilations, are they still happening?
Cattle mutilations are still occurring from time to time. I know that Barbara Campbell out in Saskatchewan is investigating a few cases from time to time, although they're very rarely reported, as you mentioned. Not only that type of UFO-related phenomena, but also landing rings and landing traces. Ted Phillips, of course, has a catalog of thousands of UFO reports in which objects were seen to descend to the ground, touch ground, and leave behind some sort of physical evidence. Those cases are almost completely absent now in UFO report literature, replaced by things like crop circles and actually the alien abduction phenomenon itself leaving behind some traces. So the physical trace cases of physical craft touching down and taking off, those appear to be gone for the most part, and yet we have some additional strange types of UFO-related phenomena which have supplanted them. So the puzzle of the UFO phenomenon continues to evolve and change in a lot of different ways.
Chris, why do you think the governments of the world are keeping what many people believe to be the truth suppressed?
Well, I don't necessarily side with the exopolitics people necessarily. I do think that in many cases, information related to UFOs are being classified and being kept classified for a number of reasons. For example, cases where objects were seen or information regarding objects in the sky were seen while on classified missions by military personnel, for example. And I think in those cases, that's reasonable to think that we may not have access to those because of security violations. I know that here in Canada, I routinely get reports from Transport Canada, from National Defence, and other official agencies. So the transparency in Canada is actually quite significant. In fact, this year perhaps I have received maybe 15 to 20 such reports going through official channels. That doesn't mean that I get everything that's reported. I don't believe I do, but I do get quite a few reports through arrangements with those agencies. So we do know that official agencies and the military are reporting and investigating these cases. There was an interesting case just a few days ago, as a matter of fact, from the time what we're taping, of something that was seen over New Brunswick. And the witnesses there were interviewed by military individuals regarding their sighting. And that's one case that I have not received, even though I do get other cases, including some from New Brunswick. So I don't think I'm getting all of them, but the transparency is very high compared with the United States, for example, where military cases and reports of UFOs have basically been cut off from UFO researchers since Blue Book shut down back in the 1960s. So there is a big gap there, but of course with continued release of information from, for example, the Ministry of Defense in England and a number of other countries, including Brazil and into Europe, there is much more information which is being made available to UFO researchers that attest to the fact that cases are really occurring in greater and greater numbers. Leslie Kean's book, which I reviewed very favorably quite recently, is a fascinating study of how military operations in countries around the world are being conducted on UFO sightings and reports, and the information is there. So the United States is an interesting black hole of UFO cases because we simply don't know exactly what's going on. But in Canada, the information is a little more forthcoming.
In your opinion, do these UFOs pose a threat to national security or to the citizens of this planet?
I don't think that UFOs pose a threat to people in general. I can understand where reports of UFOs might be a security problem. We've seen this happening quite recently with the advent of cell phones with 911 operators, where an event occurs and literally hundreds of people with cell phones flood the 911 call centers because of the proliferation of people being able to report cases as they occur. Should something like this happen, let's say we do get an actual UFO or an invasion by an enemy, whatever that enemy might be, it is foreseeable that information gathering centers, call centers, would be inundated, and that could pose some problems. But I don't think that in general the objects themselves or whatever is behind it, whether it be military or alien or otherwise, poses an actual threat to people.
Chris, stand by. You and I have to take our final break. Once again, congratulations on your new book, The Big Book of UFOs. It's published by Dundurn. For more information on the book, The Big Book of UFOs, you can go to www.dundurn.com. They've got Chris's book right on their front page. Just click on that. It's got all the information about it. It's a real book, X-Zone Nation. It's not one of these little skinny ones that you see most of the time. It has over 384 pages, pictures, diagrams, reports, investigations, factoids, and much more. Once again, that's www.dundurn.com. And Christmas is coming. This would be a great gift for anyone on your shopping list who's into UFOs, ufology, alien abductions, ghosts, and much more. Chris's blogspot is uforum.blogspot.com, and Chris and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break as the X-Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
We got too far this time, but I'm dancing on the Valentine. I tell you, somebody. On my way to better things, I found myself some ways. Distant roads are calling me. No time for a summer friend. No time for the love you send.
All right, X-Zone Nation, here's the scoop. Christmas is coming. Well, if you need to get a gift for somebody who has a very, very devoted interest to ufology, here's the book. The name of the book is The Big Book of UFOs. It's written by Chris Rutkowski. And I'll just give you a little bit of a taste of what you'll find in these 384 more pages of this book. There's photographs, there's diagrams, there's factoids. Part 1, Life in the Universe. Part 2, UFO sightings from past to present. Part 3, Contact, Abductions, Creatures, and the Search for Proof. Part 4, UFOs and Society. It also tells you how to report a UFO. And first of all, Chris, thanks very much for joining us. I know you're a very busy man, and congratulations on a super book. How important is it to the UFO research community in general how a report should be done?
Well, it's actually very important, and the investigation is very critical as well. We're finding that, for example, on the internet, there are a number of websites where people are reporting their cases, their experiences, and yet there's very little follow-ups and actual on-site investigations. This is not just in Canada, but literally around the world, and it's because there really aren't any really good pool of dedicated and very knowledgeable investigators anymore. It used to be during the advent of the days of APRO and NICAP and QFOS and other groups that every state seemed to have 20 or 30 investigators who could fan out and investigate cases dozens of miles away. That doesn't exist anymore. We do get many reports from all around the country, but they tend to be investigated by email, if at all, and perhaps a phone call or two, and we just don't have the in-depth investigations, on-site investigations, and it has to do with lack of funding, lack of resources, and lack of initiative on the part of some of the individuals involved who are collecting the information. The websites that provide information on how people can report cases and list them, for example. If the cases aren't followed up and investigated, we really don't know what became of the incident, whether the objects were explained, whether they had possible explanations, whether there were some supplementary witnesses. We don't get that. And so it's very important for proper reporting to take place and proper investigation. I don't have a simple solution on how to affect that change, but it's a problem that really is facing ufology right now, not only in Canada, but literally around the world.
Quickly, Chris, we've got about a minute. Which province in Canada reports to any UFO organization the most UFOs per year?
It is dependent on population, so it fluctuates actually between Ontario and BC. By population, Ontario has the bigger population, so we get the most reports. However, over the years, BC has had more cases, and by population, you'd think that the Maritimes would have very few cases, but it's not a direct relationship. We get many cases from the Maritimes. Wow. In fact, some of the Prairie provinces get a lot of cases as well. It's not a direct relationship, but it's there.
Chris, we have to say so long for today. As you know, you've got an open invitation. Please come back and visit us. And congratulations once again on your wonderful book. And it's been great spending an hour with you.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's been a pleasure.
Exonation, Chris Rutkowski is our special guest. He's got a new book out, The Big Book of UFOs. His blog is uforum.blogspot.com. That's it for tonight. Have a great weekend. Take care of each other. Love your children. And always keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night, everyone.